Welcome to a sleepy journey. But not a boring one. Tonight, we'll turn the pages of the tumultuous history of the Ashkenazi Jews, from their earliest exiles to the deeply ingrained memories of resistance flowing through their veins. You're not in a shtetl tonight, you're on the open steppe. Cold wind cuts across your cheekbones like a knife that forgot to say please. Wolves howl in the distance. Your boots are soaked, and if one more gust of wind smacks your tent flap open, you're going to start yelling at the moon like a mad Talmudic scholar who just lost a debate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here on Ashkenazi Historian. And hey, where are you listening from? Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit by a flickering campfire in the middle of nowhere. Not just nowhere, but a muddy, windswept crossroads where empires once bumped shoulders like strangers at a market. Roman Gaul is far behind you. The Silk Road is just a rumor on the wind. And here, where the Black Sea whispers to the Caspian, people speak in accents that make no sense to anyone but themselves, and then you hear it, a name, passed like smoke, Khazars. They're everywhere, and nowhere. They rule a kingdom, but no one seems to agree where. They trade in furs and slaves and honey and swords, but also in stories. Especially stories. And the one they're most famous for, they converted to Judaism, or maybe they didn't, or maybe just their king did, or maybe they faked the whole thing to confuse a nosy caliphate. Historians still debate what actually happened. Some say it was a full royal conversion in the 8th or 9th century. Historians still debate what actually happened. Some say it was a full royal conversion in the 8th or 9th century. Others argue it was just a diplomatic performance, a convenient neutrality in the middle of Christian Byzantium and the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate. And some, well, they make YouTube videos about DNA and start yelling, but tonight, no yelling. Only quiet curiosity. You brush ash from your sleeves and glance around. The travelers around you are wrapped in sheepskins and secrets. One of them, a Jewish silk merchant from Baghdad, leans in and says, "They're not like us, you know, they pray like us." But sideways. He's not being insulting. Just confused. You hear that the Khazars pray in Hebrew, but don't keep kosher. That they circumcise, but also eat horse meat. That their Torah scrolls are written oddly, slanted, or in a script that looks like it drank too much kumis. You nod politely, but you don't know what to believe. No one does. That's the power of the Khazars. They exist in the cracks of empire and the margins of maps. Too strange for the Christians. Too independent for the Muslims. Too Turkic for the Jews. And yet, somehow, unmistakably present, archaeologists have found traces, fortress walls in Sarkal, silver coins stamped with Arabic and Hebrew script, burial mounds with bones that don't match any one ethnicity. But if you try to build a solid story from those fragments, it slips through your fingers like steppe dust. Still, you're intrigued. One traveling monk tells you he met a Khazar general who wore a six-pointed star into battle. A Muslim trader swears the Khazar king once quoted the Psalms right before raising taxes on caravans. A runaway slave says the queens made lit candles on Friday night, and then made dumplings with pork. Fact or fable, it's hard to tell. The Khazars didn't write much down. What survives comes mostly from their neighbors, and neighbors aren't known for fair biographies. You sip something hot and terrible. Maybe it's tea. Maybe it's horse broth. It doesn't matter. Your thoughts are already drifting. You imagine what it must have felt like to be a Jew in the 9th century, wandering through Europe where bishops burned Talmuds and mobs burned synagogues. And then hearing whispers of a Jewish kingdom somewhere out east. A place where the king reads Torah. Where the palace has a mezuzah. Where Jews aren't hunted, they rule. That thought alone could carry a people through another winter. The Khazar story, real or embellished, becomes a kind of folk prophecy. Proof that Jewish strength isn't just a memory. That exile didn't erase sovereignty. That somewhere. Someone wore both tefillin and a crown. It's bedtime, so I won't yell. But let me say this gently, that hope matters more than accuracy, because no matter how few Khazars became Jewish, or how sincere their royal conversion, or how poorly they kept mitzvot, their story stayed, in letters. In dreams. In genealogies half-true and full-hearted, and later, oh yes, later, others would twist that story into something darker. But for now, it glows softly in the firelight, a Jewish kingdom in the steppe, half-truth. Half-prayer, you lie back on your bedroll. The wind hums like an old lullaby, somewhere out there, Khazar horses gallop across frozen rivers. Somewhere, a crown rests on a Torah scroll. And you whisper to yourself, maybe it happened, maybe it still could. You wake to a sound most unfamiliar, silence. The wind has died down. The steppe, endless and gray, stretches in every direction like parchment waiting for ink. You stir the ashes of last night's fire and sip the same terrible tea, or horse broth, depending who you ask, then, you climb a hill, not for the view. For the maps, below you, caravans move like ants across the dirt. North, furs. South, dates. East, silk. West, wine. You realize this isn't nowhere. This is in between. The Khazars knew it, they didn't build their kingdom in spite of geography. They built it because of it, wedged like a coin in the cushion between two imperial sofas, the Byzantine Empire to the west, the Abbasid Caliphate to the south, and they played those two empires like a fiddle. On Monday, they'd welcome an ambassador from Constantinople with golden gifts and promises of Christian friendship. On Thursday, they'd host a Muslim envoy, citing shared interests and salt routes. All week long, they'd quietly tax both, with smiles and tea made from fermented milk. This wasn't just politics. It was survival. You duck into a smoky tent where a Khazar noble explains the art of neutrality, or as he calls it, not dying. The Christians want your soul. The Muslims want your allegiance. We want to keep trading honey. He laughs. You don't, yet, because this strategy, this buffer state diplomacy, worked. For centuries, the Khazars formed the Khaganate, a confederation of Turkic tribes ruled by a Khagan, emperor, and a Bek, military chief. They controlled key segments of the Silk Road, extracting tribute from Slavic tribes, brokering peace between warlords, and occasionally reminding both the Byzantines and Abbasids that distance is a good excuse for not answering letters, and all the while, they maintained a curious balance. They built fortresses with Byzantine engineers. They hired Muslim scribes to document trade. They held Jewish advisors close, not necessarily because of faith, but because Jews often spoke multiple languages, including Greek, Arabic, and the trader's favorite, numbers. You step inside a Khazar war council. There's a map pinned to the wall with ivory needles. The generals argue in a blend of Turkic and Persian. But your guide whispers in your ear, that dot on the river. That's Sarkal. Our white fortress, built by Greeks. Manned by Khazars. Watched by everyone. Sarkal was no myth. Archaeologists unearthed its remains along the Don River, white stone walls, ramparts thick enough to stop a Persian elephant. It stood as a symbol, we're not nomads anymore. We're here to stay. And the empires noticed. Byzantium occasionally threatened to Christianize them. The Caliphate sent letters about the virtues of Islam. But neither pushed too hard. They needed Khazaria as a cushion, a filter, a polite barrier made of bearded merchants and well-fed horses. Still, you sense the pressure building. A kingdom between empires is like a candle between books, elegant, flickering, doomed to melt one of them eventually. You walk the muddy streets of Adil, the Khazar capital. There's no synagogue. No mosque. No church. Only markets. Carts overflowing with copper, wool, dried fish, and rumors. A Persian trader swears he saw the Khagan's crown shaped like a menorah. A Greek monk claims the Khagan's wife secretly prays toward Mecca. A Slavic farmer just wants his ox back. Truth, in Khazaria, is a slippery coin. Flip it one way, empire, flip it the other, myth. That slipperiness made them powerful and vulnerable. Some historians wonder if the Khazar elite began experimenting with religion precisely because of their position. Why choose one empire's god, when you can pick the only one neither empire controls? Judaism, not Roman. Not Arab. Not tied to conquest or caliphate. Ancient, mysterious, and, crucially, mobile. You imagine the Khagan sitting in his tent, unrolling scrolls in Hebrew, Greek, and Arabic. He reads them all. Then he looks up and says, "Let's be Jews." It'll confuse everyone. A joke, maybe. Or a tactic. Or a moment of genuine spiritual revelation. Historians still debate that part. What matters is that the Khazars didn't make choices in a vacuum. They made them in tension, in the pressure cooker of being between two vast empires, and for a while, it worked. Trade flowed. Fortresses stood. Tribes united, or at least agreed not to stab each other before breakfast, and Khazaria thrived, not despite being a buffer, but because of it. You descend the hill as the sun sets. The sky burns in streaks of red and orange. Two ravens fly in opposite directions. You think to yourself, the Khazars knew how to ride the wind, even when it blew from both sides, but kingdoms can't balance forever, and in the distance, on both horizons, you now see them, two great empires leaning in. Curious, hungry, patient, you're still in the capital, Otto, or what's left of it. A breeze carries smells of salted fish, leather, and something spiced and boiling that's either soup or trouble. Somewhere between tents and timber buildings, a crowd gathers. Not for trade this time, for testimony. Word has spread, the Khagan is curious. About religion. About God. About what might hold his kingdom together when gold and swords fall short. You push your way forward. 3 scholars stand before the court. 1 Christian. 1 Muslim. 1 Jew, not the setup for a joke, although, honestly, it could be. The Khagan gestures for the Muslim to speak first. He quotes the Quran. He speaks of Allah's mercy and the unity of the Ummah. The court nods politely. Then the Christian makes his case. He invokes the Trinity, the Church Fathers, the eternal kingdom of Christ, finally. The Jew, likely a Sephardi from Al-Andalus, steps forward. No dramatic miracles. No thunder. Just Torah, halakha, and centuries of survival. The Khagan leans back. He strokes his beard, which is probably so oiled it glistens in the candlelight. He asks one question: if you couldn't choose your own religion, which would you choose of the other two? The Jew points to the Muslim, his. The Muslim points to the Jew, his. The Christian looks mildly offended. The Khagan smiles. Then we'll choose yours, the one you all agree is closest to truth. Now. Is this a real moment? Historians are still unsure. That story comes from the Khazari, a 12th century philosophical dialogue by Yehuda Halevi. It retells the Khazar conversion as allegory, the king as a seeker, Judaism as a logical choice. But even if the exact words are fictional, the event itself is widely accepted. A conversion happened. Some say it was around the 8th or 9th century. Others argue for a more gradual adoption, the royal elite first, followed by select advisors, traders, and scholars. There's little evidence the whole population converted, and even less that the Khazars became religiously devout across the board, but still, something changed. You walk past a tent where Hebrew is spoken beside Turkic. You see coins minted with Hebrew script, not just Arabic. You pass a soldier with a 6-pointed star stitched into his tunic. His hands are bloodied. His lips whisper a psalm. It's complicated. One Jewish merchant tells you the Khazars keep Shabbat. Mostly. Another rolls his eyes and says they pray to the right God but in the wrong direction. A Muslim trader mutters that the Khazar Jews drink too much and rarely fast. You nod. It's messy, because conversion isn't a switch. It's a negotiation, between belief and politics. Between symbolism and sincerity, and the Khazars. They were experts at negotiation. This was more than religion. It was identity diplomacy. Judaism offered them a third way, neither Roman nor Arab, neither empire nor puppet. It was an identity that allowed Khazaria to remain itself. While confusing everyone else, you crouch beside an old scribe, furiously copying Torah scrolls on step parchment. He sighs, do they really believe? I don't know, but they listen. And they let me write. That alone feels revolutionary. Back in Europe, Jews are being taxed, expelled, or worse. Here, they're scribes, advisors, and, for the first time in centuries, protected by a crown. You sit down by a riverbank and watch geese ripple through the reeds. A boy recites Hebrew letters. His accent is strange, step-thick and slurred. But the Aleph is there. The Bet. The Gimel, even if the kingdom forgets. The letters will remain, and that's the strange miracle of Khazaria, not just that a kingdom converted. But that Jewishness flourished, in a place without pogroms, without inquisitions, without ghettos. For a moment, history blinked. And found Jewish sovereignty, but already, the clouds gather, scholars still debate how long the conversion lasted. Whether the Khaganate remained Jewish for a century, or if it faded into symbolism once the politics shifted. Some even argue that later rulers returned quietly to old gods, or to Islam, or nothing at all, but tonight, you walk under the stars with a scroll tucked into your belt and a candle in your hand. Somewhere beyond the hills, someone else lights their own Shabbat flame. It flickers. It leans, but it burns, the grass bends low in the wind, and the stars hang heavy, thick as candles in a synagogue's window. You're no longer wandering. You've stayed, somehow, you're part of this odd, windswept kingdom now. A Jewish enclave in the most unlikely place, the Eurasian steppe. You rise before dawn. It's market day, but this isn't Krakow, or Cordoba, or Jerusalem, this is Khazaria, where the fishmongers swear in Hebrew. The butchers haggle in Turkic, and the kosher wine is imported from Georgia by a man with more silver in his teeth than in his purse. You duck into a wooden synagogue, its beams bleached pale by the harsh winters. There's no grand ark, no ornate windows, just a worn Torah scroll, a cracked oil lamp, and a scholar scribbling down notes with a feather from a goose that looks dangerously alive. He squints at you. You're early, he says, even the geese are still asleep. You smile. Because Jewish life here doesn't look like what you imagined. There's no yeshiva, but there's learning, often in the back of a merchant's tent. There's no rabbinical court, but there are elders, arguing law over fermented mare's milk and salted cheese. Shabbat isn't quiet and solemn. It's rowdy, joyful, filled with half-sung prayers and children playing tag around the scroll case. You step outside, a Khazar soldier adjusts his talith before a battle. A Jewish healer stitches a Turkic chieftain's wound with thread boiled in wine. A woman leads a song in Hebrew under the stars, her voice bending toward the unfamiliar vowels of the steppes. This is not exile, this is something stranger, this is home, built on adaptation. Historians still debate the extent of Jewish religious life in Khazaria. Did they build schools? Did they follow halakhic law strictly? Did they face internal conflicts about conversion or practice? The answer, often, is yes. And also no, because Khazaria was always a hybrid, a Jewish crown ruling over mostly non-Jewish subjects, a kingdom where belief served diplomacy, a place where identity was a toolkit, not a prison. You visit a family lighting Shabbat candles inside a felt yurt. The father wears a robe stitched with Hebrew psalms and goat fur. The mother stirs a stew thick with garlic and lentils. The child recites a bedtime prayer that includes a Slavic proverb halfway through, and it works, because this is not the Judaism of Babylon or Jerusalem. This is steppe Judaism, improvised, resilient, weather-worn. You overhear a scribe mutter, the Talmud never mentioned goose feathers, snowstorms, or onion domes, but I suppose we're writing a new page now. Outside, the Khagan's advisors debate tax policy in 3 languages. One wears a yarmulke. One does not. A third claims to have seen a vision of Elijah in a dream, or maybe it was just indigestion from the dumplings. You pass a graveyard where the tombstones face east, toward Jerusalem. The letters are Hebrew, but the names. The names are Turkic, Slavic, Persian. One reads, "Here lies Batya, daughter of Bek Yitzhak, who traded spices and wisdom, and knew more languages than sins." You pause, because it's here, among the graves, that it hits you. This wasn't just a flirtation with faith. It wasn't a strategic move or a historical oddity. It was a real attempt, however brief, at creating a Jewish space with power, no ghettos. No kings to fear, they were the kings. Of course, it didn't last, but for now, in the hush of twilight, it feels eternal. A steppe wind whistles through the tall grass. You pull your cloak tighter. Somewhere behind you, a child chants Hebrew by memory, but with a melody no rabbi would recognize, and that's the thing about exile. Sometimes, when it lasts long enough, it doesn't feel like exile anymore, it feels like you. The ashes don't fall all at once. Empires rarely die in a single winter. They wither, like candle wax, like whispered prayers. And you, unfortunately, are here to witness the quiet unraveling of something that once felt eternal. Khazaria, your strange, windswept home, is crumbling, not with a dramatic battle or a traitor's blade. But slowly. Politely. Like a guest overstaying their welcome in history's banquet hall. It begins with silence. The marketplace is quieter now. Fewer caravans arrive. The Georgian wine merchant hasn't been seen in weeks. The Khazar guards, once proud, once casually fluent in Aramaic curses, now mumble in foreign dialects, their tunics patched and ill-fitting. You walk to synagogue, the roof has collapsed on one side. No one's fixed it. A goat has taken up residence in the women's section. No one minds, the rabbi shrugs when you ask what happened. The Byzantines, maybe. Or the Rus. Or simply time. What empire lasts forever, new? He's not wrong. Historians still debate who delivered the final blow. Some say the Rus Prince Sviatoslav, launching his campaigns from the north. Others point to internal weakness, decentralization, religious tensions, bad harvests. Some suggest the decline was already underway, the Jewish elite fading as quickly as they rose. But down here, at your level? It's simpler, there's less bread. More taxes, the jokes don't hit as hard, the local Turkic villagers still greet you with respect, but something has shifted. You're no longer part of a reigning class. You're just another minority. And in this part of the world, that comes with risk. You help the old scribe pack his scrolls. He says he's heading west. Maybe to Hungary. Maybe further. They say there are Jews in Mainz, he says, cold place. But lots of letters. My kind of town. You don't want to go, but the wind is changing. You can smell it, not like smoke, not yet. But like something missing, the child who once sang psalms in steppe melodies has stopped singing. The felt yurt where you once spent Shabbat now houses a family of mercenaries, and your heart, your Yiddishkeit heart, your Khazarian Jewish heart, begins to ache. You gather what little you own. A cracked spice box. A letter from a cousin in Kiev. A child's wooden dreidel with one side worn smooth from too much joy. You walk east first, then turn west. Always west, because that's where the stories go. That's where the next chapter waits, even if you don't know the words yet. One night, you rest under a pine tree. The stars are the same. But the silence is heavier. You murmur a prayer in Hebrew, one that now feels like a foreign language in your mouth, but then you hear it, laughter, not far, a campfire. A family. Speaking in a strange blend of tongues, Hebrew, Turkic, Slavic, and something new. Something softer, almost German. You draw near. They welcome you. Offer tea. One of them, a young girl, hums a melody that sounds like a lullaby your own grandmother used to sing, and you realize, the kingdom may fall, but the melody survives, empires collapse, but the exiles carry embers. One of the men, a weaver, asks your name, you give it, then pause. From the Khazar lands, you add. Before it all. He nods, then you'll fit right in. We're all from somewhere that vanished. The fire crackles. Someone tells a joke in bad Hebrew. You laugh anyway, because you're not alone, and because even in exile, especially in exile, the Jewish story continues. You dream of rivers. Long. Silver ones that split the forest like a knife through rye. You dream of bridges, too, rickety, woodworm things that barely hold your cart. You wake up, and realize you're still on the road. The Khazar sun is behind you now. Ahead, fog, pine, and the soft grumble of unfamiliar accents. You've entered the lands of the Slavs, not quite home, not quite foreign, and your boots are permanently damp. You're not alone, other wanderers walk beside you. Some from Kiev. Others from deep Crimea. One woman says her family came all the way from Persia generations ago. Another speaks Aramaic and Polish in alternating sentences, and no one corrects her. You pass through towns where Jewish traders have already made small claims, a stall at the market. A butcher's stall marked with a scratched-out shin, a bakery with hulla shaped like half-moons. These are not communities yet. Not quite. More like footholds, spiritual potholders in a kitchen that hasn't been built yet, but still, they gather. Historians still debate how early these movements westward began. Some place Jews in the Rhineland as early as the 4th century, migrating via Roman trade routes. Others see the real waves forming in the 9th to 10th centuries, after Khazaria's decline and as Slavic and Magyar powers shifted control. The sources are murky. Archaeology whispers, but doesn't shout. Still, you walk, you hear stories of cities called Mainz, Worms, and Speyer, the Shum cities, some say. Places where scrolls gleam like swords and rabbis write as if the ink might save a soul. You want to believe that. Your children learn new lullabies. Not the steppe ballads, but songs with strange rhymes, half German, half Hebrew, and half sarcasm. You don't ask about the math, your beard grows gray, you help bury a fellow traveler on a hill near Prague. There's no synagogue, so you carve the word shalom into the rock and hope God doesn't mind the spelling. You wrap him in a borrowed tallis. Whisper the mourner's kaddish to an audience of ravens, and when you rise, aching, quiet, someone takes your hand. Not in romance. In continuity, you make it to Mainz, and it's like walking into a book someone else already began. There's a synagogue. Small, smoky, beautiful. There's a mikveh with water cold enough to stun sin right out of your bones. And there's a man named Gershom ben Judah who writes responsa like he's channeling Sinai through a quill. You join the community. Not instantly. Not easily. You're an outsider, a Khazarian. A steppe Jew. A maybe. But you speak Hebrew. You know Torah. And you can fix a broken thatched roof faster than any rabbi in town. Eventually, they let you teach, you tell stories, of wide rivers, goat hair tents, and a king who once wore tzitzit under chain mail. The children stare. One laughs and says, "You're just making it up." You wink, maybe. But the stories stay. One boy starts copying them into the margins of his Gemara. A girl sets them to melody. You catch someone carving your tale into the back of a doorpost. Your past, Khazar, exile, soup-stained memory, is becoming folklore. You realize you've arrived in Ashkenaz. No one's quite sure what the name means. Some say it comes from a grandson of Noah. Others say it's just an old word from the Torah repurposed to label this misty corner of Europe. Either way, you accept it. You write a letter to your cousin still in Crimea, "Come west." There's bread. There's laughter. There are people who argue about the Talmud until dawn and still ask if you've eaten. You end with, "We may not be a kingdom anymore, but we're building something older than kingdoms." You light Shabbat candles. Your children grow up speaking a new sort of speech, a kitchen Yiddish, soft and stubborn. The Khazar vowels are gone. But the chutzpah remains. One night, your daughter writes a poem. It begins, "In the land west of nowhere, my father came walking." And you realize, the journey wasn't for you, it was for her. you wake to bells, not church bells, not yet. Just the clinking kind, as market stalls unfold like paper flowers in the dawn. Mine smells like wet wood, fish stew, and ink. Always ink, you're no longer a traveler. You're settled. Well, as much as a Jew in medieval Europe can be, this is Ashkenaz now. Not a name you chose, but one you've grown into. Like a hand-me-down coat that finally fits, patched, lopsided, warm, you step into the synagogue, where a boy is studying Rashi's commentary on the weekly Parsha. He's 10. He can already argue you under the bima. He asks whether angels need shoes. You say yes. If they're delivering judgment in muddy places like this, he doesn't laugh. He's thinking, these are the Shum cities, Shin for spire, Vav for worms, Mem for minds. Not capitals, not fortresses, but the beating heart of Ashkenazi life in the 11th century. Here, the Torah is the spine of the city. Children chant verses before they learn how to bake bread. Weddings are timed by the moon and the local cheese markets. And the rabbis argue with the precision of blacksmiths. You meet Rabbeinu Gershom, the light of the exile. He's already passed by now, but his bans remain: no more polygamy, no peeking at private mail, and absolutely no divorcing your wife without her consent. Revolutionary stuff, tucked inside Talmudic footnotes. Historians marvel at how modern his rulings feel. You just marvel at how your wife hasn't thrown a pickle jar at you in 2 weeks. You teach a class of girls letters. The boys sneer at first. Girls don't study, they mumble, but one of the girls, Shana, learns to write her name backwards and forwards in Hebrew and Aramaic, and adds a tiny aleph just for flair. You say nothing. Just hand her more ink. Outside, the Gentile world turns uneasy. Whispers of crusades drift in like wood smoke. The Pope has called for knights to reclaim Jerusalem, and some interpret this as license to begin the cleansing at home. Town by town, pogroms bloom like poison mushrooms. The Jews of Mainz, Worms, and Spire know what's coming, and yet, they prepare Shabbat. You help hide Torah scrolls beneath the floorboards. Shana memorizes psalms. Someone sharpens a kitchen knife, not for violence, but to trim the burnt edges of the Shabbat bread, just in case it's the last loaf. You try to stay calm. In Worms, you help build a mikveh underground, stone by aching stone, because ritual must endure, even when the world above cracks. That's how Ashkenazi Judaism survives, not in palaces, but in basements, attics, and whispered continuity. Historians call this era the consolidation of Ashkenazi identity, a time when Jews of the Rhineland began to define themselves not by where they came from, but by what they practiced, preserved, and passed on. You just call it Friday. A young boy, born in Spire, writes a poem in Hebrew and German. He calls his mother a prophet in the kitchen. You scribble that line into the margins of your prayer book. At night, the children dream in 3 languages. You begin to forget where Khazaria even was, but you remember the songs, because now, your grandchildren will hum them, laced with German vowels, lilted in Slavic tones, but holding the same candle at ache, and for the first time, you believe this people, this Ashkenazi story, might not vanish, not today. Not tomorrow, not as long as the letters stay lit, and the girls keep writing alephs just for flair. You hear the scratching before you see her. In the attic above the rabbi's house, under slanted wooden beams and a roof patched with waxed parchment, a young woman sits hunched over vellum. Her candle flickers like it knows it shouldn't be here. Her name is Leah. You've seen her at synagogue. Always quiet, always watching. Never called to read, never asked to speak. But here, in this sliver of silence, she writes, not recipes. Not letters to absent husbands. But theology. She's copying arguments she overheard the rabbis mutter during lunch. Reconstructing legal debates from memory. Then adding her own thoughts, gently, precisely, in margins shaped like flowers. One line asks, if the Shekinah follows us into exile, does she suffer as we do? No one sees these pages but the mice and, once, you, standing frozen in the doorway, trying not to startle her quill. She looks up. You don't speak. She doesn't hide the parchment, she just says, they wouldn't listen if I said it aloud. And returns to writing. This attic becomes your second synagogue. Below, men argue over whether it's permissible to milk a goat on festival days. Above, Leah maps the emotional geography of the Talmud, where halacha meets heartbreak. She writes about widows who challenge heaven, about angels who make bureaucratic errors. You begin to smuggle her work into the rabbinic discourse, a phrase here, a footnote there. You quote her anonymously and watch as the rabbis nod. Brilliant, one says, Rabbi Tam. You just shrug. Leah never asks for credit. She only asks for more parchment. Historians barely remember her. Women's theology wasn't often copied, unless a husband vouched for it, and Leah had no husband, only ink-stained fingers and a stubborn love for holy questions. Still, her ideas ripple through the Ashkenazi pietists, especially in 12th century Germany. These mystics, Hasidiyai Ashkenaz, speak of God's sorrow, of divine suffering that mirrors human exile. Some even begin to imagine a God who weeps. Leah smiles when you read that aloud. You say, they'd never admit it, but I think they're quoting you. One winter, she falls ill, the attic grows cold. You carry wood up each night. She keeps writing with hands too shaky for soup spoons. Her final piece isn't a responsum. It's a lullaby. Shekinah in the rafters, wrapped in wool and ash, sing my people stories. Through every midnight crash, you copy it into the blank end page of your own siddur, and you read it aloud at her burial, when no one else has the words. Years later, you'll hear a mother in Krakow hum it to her baby. You'll ask where she learned it, and she'll say, oh, it's just something the women passed down. And that's enough, because theology written in candlelight may never get quoted in footnotes, but it survives in lullabies, and in the attic dust between heaven and halacha. You smell the crust before you see it, thick, sweet, and burning just slightly, the kind of overdone bottom that only comes from a shared oven and a distracted baker telling stories. You're in Krakow now, or maybe Lviv. Geography gets slippery in exile. But the bread? It never changes. This isn't ordinary bread. It's psalm bread. A woman holds it with both hands, not reverently, but carefully, like a secret. She wraps it in linen printed with Hebrew verses and kisses it once before passing it off to her daughter. You follow that daughter. She weaves through the alleyways of the Jewish quarter, past candlemakers, parchment dyers, and one man who claims his chickens can sense the calendar. She slips the loaf into the hands of another woman, who unwraps it, reads the verses, murmurs a prayer, and begins to copy the psalms onto scraps of cloth. None of them would call it smuggling. It's just how scripture survives, because now, printing presses are no longer rare, but permission to use them? That's another story. Authorities control what's sacred. What's dangerous? What's foreign? And Yiddish, Hebrew, and Aramaic texts often qualify as all three, so Jewish women get creative. They bake verses into crusts. They sew them into hems. A shirt may carry Deuteronomy beneath its seams. A tablecloth might double as an Esther scroll if read in the right light. You visit a home where children are gathered. No ink, no paper, just a piece of challah shaped like the Hebrew letter lamed. The Rebbetzin teaches them to recognize it by taste. God is in the details, she whispers, and sometimes in the dough. Historians call this period a golden age of folk piety, where religion isn't just in the yeshiva, but in kitchens, fabrics, songs. Some scholars even argue that these domestic rituals created a kind of female Torah tradition, parallel, unrecorded, deeply felt. Others scoff. There's no proof. No names, no archives, but you remember Leah in the attic, and you know the archive is alive, in lullabies, in loaves, in linen passed from mother to daughter like a mezuzah of the body. You help a boy copy a psalm onto paper using boiled onion skin for ink. His handwriting is chaos, but his recitation is perfect. You don't correct him. You just offer more parchment. Later, at market, you see the same boy selling bagels from a basket. As each customer takes one, he recites, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." No one stops him. No one suspects. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary thing a Jew can do, is feed someone and quote scripture in a dialect the authorities don't bother to understand. You think of Rome. You think of Khazaria. You think of Worms and Spire. All the places where Torahs were burned, buried, or banned, and still. This loaf, still warm, still full of psalms. You're at a wedding now, not yours, not yet, but one of those blustery Ashkenazi affairs where the geese honk louder than the musicians and half the town claims to be related to the bride. There's garlic in the air. Wine on the floor. Someone's uncle is already arguing with the rabbi about table placement, and then, from the edge of the tent, the Batkin arrives. He's a wiry man with tired shoes and mischievous eyes. His coat is 2 decades out of date and 4 jokes too bright. But when he opens his mouth, the wedding stills, he doesn't speak. He recites, verse, insult, eulogy, blessing, his job is strange. Sacred, even. He tells the story of the couple, not the one on the ketubah, but the emotional one. The one made of missed dowries, secret crushes, and family trees with too many goats. The groom tried to study Torah, but fell asleep by Exodus 3, the bride whispered commentary, in her soup, quite heretically. Everyone laughs, even the rabbi, the Batkin bows, you don't know where he learned his art. Some say he studied under a folk poet in Vilna. Others whisper he spent time with Kabbalists who taught him to rhyme in 4 dimensions, but what's true is this, he remembers everything, he remembers who skipped a bris. Who made a fool of themselves last Yom Kippur. He remembers the bride's great-grandmother's recipe for vinegar cake, and uses it as a metaphor for love that matures. He weaves Yiddish and Hebrew, Polish jokes and Talmudic puns, midrash with marketplace gossip. And when he finally lifts his glass to toast the couple, his words are both holy and absurd. May your love be like a page of Gemara, full of argument, side commentary, and enough footnotes to last generations. It's genius. Everyone's crying and laughing at once, but the Batkin wasn't always for weddings. In some communities, especially after tragedy, they were invited to funerals too. To eulogize not with pure sorrow, but with the kind of humor that makes grief bearable. You remember one such day, a pogrom had passed like a storm with no sky. The community was shattered. No one had words, except him. He stood on the rubble of the ruined shul and whispered. The angels up there, they needed a cantor, so they borrowed ours. Without asking. You saw hardened men weep. Then smile. Historians sometimes dismiss Bet Konim as mere entertainers. But more recent scholars call them emotional archivists, oral historians who carried entire genealogies, midrashim, inside jokes, and the trauma of exile. In verse, some Bet Konim were women, quietly. Discreetly. Especially in private settings, blessing brides, composing whispered lullabies. Their rhymes weren't loud, but they lingered longer. You once asked a Batkin, do your poems ever get written down? He laughed, if they did, they'd die, paper forgets what mouths remember. Later in life, you quote him in a synagogue debate. A rabbi sneers, who's your source? You say, the man who toasted my cousin's wedding with a metaphor about pickled herring. And somehow, that's enough, because in the world of Ashkenaz, truth doesn't always come in velvet bindings, sometimes, it comes wearing second-hand shoes and a rhyme that burns long after the laughter fades. It begins in silence, not the soft silence of sleep or story time, but the thick, breathless kind. The kind you hear in the synagogue of Przemysl just after a funeral. Or in the attic of a scribe whose hands have stopped mid-letter. You're there, candle in hand, the Torah scroll on the table is half finished, parchment stretched taut, ink still damp. The scribe who started it has passed. No apprentice. No backup, and now. No one knows what to do, but someone has an idea, not one man, many. One brings the goose feather. One boils fresh ink with gallnuts and wine. One sharpens a blade for trimming parchment. And another, shaking, recites the laws, no broken letters. No missing crowns, no smudges that look like a second yud. Together, they begin, you watch them work in shifts. By day, they're tailors and teachers and pickled herring vendors. By night, They become a collective scribe, each with a shaky but sincere hand, continuing one sacred letter at a time. The scroll grows slowly, the letters are uneven. Some too bold. Some so faint you'd think they were whispered onto the parchment. But they're correct. They pass inspection, because each one is written with trembling love. Historians have found a few scrolls like this, mismatched handwriting, shared authorship. Some are dismissed as unworthy. But in some communities, they're treasured. Known as orphan scrolls. Others call them widows' Torahs. Because often, they're born after disaster. You think of Leah, again. Of Bub. Of fishmongers quoting psalms in the market square. And you realize, this is what happens after the tragedy. After the burning. After the loss, when the survivors gather. And keep writing. There's one man you meet, an old cobbler, who writes the letter Vav so consistently wrong, it's almost poetic. Every time it leans just a little too far right, like it's reaching for something, someone suggests scraping and rewriting, but the Rebbe shakes his head. Leave it. The Torah should remember how he stood. Because that's what this scroll is, a memory quilt, written in ink instead of thread, and when it's finished, weeks later, they read from it. Not in pride. Not in sorrow, in awe. The blessings are the same, the chant is unchanged, but the weight of the scroll is different. Heavier. Like it remembers how many hands held it. That night, you walk home with one of the scribes, a butcher by trade. He tells you, with quiet pride, it's not perfect. But it lives. You ask him if he's afraid of the rabbis finding fault. He shrugs. They'd be right. But also wrong. Some scholars argue whether these multi-hand scrolls should count. Whether halakha permits such collective writing. Whether intention can substitute for expertise, but others, often the poor, the exiled, the orphaned, say, if the Torah was only for experts, we'd have lost it 1,000 years ago. You glance back at the shul, the light is still burning, the scroll is still open, and in your heart, one truth curls up like candle smoke. Torah was never meant for one hand, it takes a people. You're in Prague now, not the postcard one with castles and clocks, but the rain-slick alleys of the ghetto in the late 1500s. Candlelight spills from narrow windows, bouncing off cobbled streets that never seem dry. You've just passed a butcher arguing with his cat. And a girl singing a lullaby that names all the prophets in rhyme, and at the end of the alley, standing guard beside the Altnusko, is the story, you've heard whispers since childhood. That the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Judah Low, once fashioned a man from clay, the golem, built not from magic, but from desperation. The story shifts depending who tells it. In one version, blood libels were rising. In another, the emperor was toying with expulsions. Either way, the Jews needed protection, and prayers weren't enough. So the Maharal turned to the Book of Creation, Sefer Yetzirah, a mystical manual said to teach how letters build life. He shaped a man from mud and whispered sacred syllables into its ear. Wrote Emet, truth, on its forehead, and the golem lived, or something like it. He carried water. Stood guard. Patrolled the ghetto while others slept. Some say he roared like thunder. Others say he wept like a child. But all agree, he obeyed only one man, until he didn't. One Friday, the Maharal forgot to deactivate him before Shabbat. The golem, confused, unblessed, began to unravel. Not violently. But unstoppably. Like a poem that keeps reciting itself until it forgets it's a poem. The rabbi raced to stop him, wiped the first letter from his brow. Emet became Met, truth became death, and the golem collapsed. Some say his clay body still lies in the attic of the synagogue, wrapped in a dusty prayer shawl, dreaming in silence. Others claim he was ground down, quietly, and mixed into the next batch of bricks, still watching, still listening. Historians debate everything about the story. Was it metaphor? Myth? A veiled commentary on the power and limits of human agency. Some scholars believe it wasn't about a creature at all, but about language. About the way Jewish letters, once uttered in desperation, could reshape a cruel world. Because the golem wasn't built with strength, he was built with Hebrew, letter by letter, breath by breath, which is why, even after the tale ends, you still feel his presence. You see it in how people look at the synagogue's attic, even when they know it's locked. You hear it in the caution of old Yiddish proverbs, don't wake what was molded in fear. You feel it in yourself, because haven't you also tried to shape something protective, only to fear what it might become? You once asked a Rebbe, why didn't the Maharal build another? He shook his head. Because he didn't need to. The story was stronger than the golem. And he was right. The golem has walked through every century since, in resistance fighters whispering sacred verses in bunkers, in parents smuggling lullabies across borders, in scholars reshaping exile into literature. He still guards us, not with clay fists, but with the story about him. That's the trick, isn't it? The golem didn't forget to stop, we just never stopped telling his story. You're in a cramped workshop in Krakow now, your head brushing against beams darkened by decades of smoke and ink. There's a smell, not unpleasant, of boiled glue, scorched parchment, and just a hint of pickled cabbage drifting in from the apartment upstairs. In front of you, a man is sweating, not from fear. From concentration, he's setting tiny metal letters into a frame. Backwards. One by one. You blink, trying to follow. A nun here, a tzadi there. A Hebrew aleph flanked by characters that don't quite belong to any one language. This isn't Hebrew, it isn't German, it's Yiddish, and this printer. He's about to do something very illegal, not criminal, exactly, but defiant. Because Yiddish printing in the early modern era was often frowned upon, banned outright, or censored to oblivion by both Christian authorities and some Jewish ones. To some rabbis, Yiddish seemed unserious, secular, vulgar, not fit for sacred eyes. But that didn't stop Reuven the typesetter. He sets his letters fast. Slips double meanings into chapter headings. Hides jokes in the footnotes. He swaps obvious words for folk idioms that only make sense if you've heard them whispered in a shtetl kitchen, and once a month, just before dawn, he fires up the press, the wheel creaks, the ink bites, and Yiddish pours out, pages of it, folk tales, love poems, satirical sermons, parenting guides, wedding songs, even fantasy travelogues involving Jewish pirates and cities of talking lions. The authorities? They skim the titles, ethical writings of Rabbi X. Boring, they don't realize it's satire. That the rabbi is fictional. That the whole book is a coded protest against both religious repression and political decay. You help bind the copies. Cheap glue, rough edges, misaligned borders. But once the books are wrapped in string and handed off to the smirking boys who deliver them across town, they're transformed. The women who receive them read aloud while stirring soup, the men read them in secret after prayer, the children memorize the rhymes and repeat them at school, which is exactly what got 2 of them whipped last week. Still, the books spread. Some scholars call this era the Yiddish Renaissance. But Reuven just calls it Tuesday. You ask him if he worries about getting caught, he shrugs. Censorship is like soup with no salt. Looks fine. Tastes like nothing. He flips to a page and shows you a fake colophon, claiming the book was printed in Constantinople, by monks. They'll never check, he says. Monks have beautiful handwriting. You laugh. Because of course they won't, and in that moment, you realize, this isn't just printing, it's rebellion, gentle rebellion, conducted with type and twine. Yiddish printing gave voice to an entire people too often spoken over. And while official Hebrew texts could be confiscated, studied, dissected, these little, pulpy Yiddish booklets slid through unnoticed. They were messy, they were mischievous, they were alive. Historians still debate whether this was literature or folklore. Whether the authors were poets or pranksters. Whether the spellings were corruptions or innovations, but they don't debate impact. The book survived. More importantly, so did the readers. As you leave Reuven's workshop that night, you pass one of his delivery boys. He's humming a tune from the last chapbook, something about Elijah in disguise and a goose that lays kashrut eggs. You smile, because that's the future of this culture, not locked in libraries, but running barefoot through Krakow, shouting rhymes about prophets and poultry, and in the distance, the printing press creaks again, still working, still whispering, still Jewish, you're rocking gently in a wagon now, somewhere in Eastern Europe, sometime in the late 1700s. The wheels groan under sacks of onions, prayer shawls, and a grandmother who talks to ghosts. Your traveling companions are wrapped in wool, lulled half asleep by the rhythm of the road, except for the boy with curls, who keeps trying to read every signpost aloud, but the signs are in Polish. Or German. Or some hybrid of both. He squints. Sounds it out phonetically. Then repeats it in Yiddish, the only language that feels like home, and that's the thing, Yiddish isn't supposed to exist, not officially. Not according to the textbooks, it isn't pure. It isn't sacred. It's a jumbled, stubborn, living tongue that grew out of exile like moss from stone, not taught in schools but hummed in kitchens, argued in markets, and sung to children who never saw a Torah scroll up close. You've heard scholars try to define it, medieval German dialect with heavy Hebrew influence. Fusion vernacular born in the Rhineland. Judeo-German Creole with Slavic borrowings. None of it feels quite right. Yiddish isn't just what's said, it's how. You watch the grandmother in the wagon whisper to her grandson, using words that don't exist in any dictionary. Her oi is a full sentence. Her nu is a whole conversation, they're inventing meaning on the fly, and back in the shtetl, that same language has recipes in it. Compliments that sound like insults. Proverbs that rhyme accidentally. Words like kvetch, schlep, mensch, chutzpah, none of which fully translate because they're soaked in cultural context and a dash of sarcasm. The boy asks if Yiddish is a real language. You hesitate. Then say, it's real because you're using it. He nods, then uses it to make up a new song about goats. Historians still argue over Yiddish's place in the Jewish world. Some once saw it as a lower-class embarrassment, a corruption of Hebrew. Others hailed it as the purest reflection of Ashkenazi daily life, messy, heartfelt, endlessly adaptable. The Enlightenment tried to kill it, modern Zionism tried to replace it, the Holocaust tried to erase it entirely, but Yiddish didn't listen. Instead, it hid in lullabies. Smuggled itself into American vaudeville. Dressed up as comedy on Borscht Belt stages. Murmured through immigration interviews. Tucked itself into second-hand bookstores. And sometimes, in rare moments, it resurfaces, a phrase in a grandparent's letter, a line in a klezmer tune, a Yiddish curse muttered at traffic by someone born in 1994, you pass a fork in the road. Literally, two paths split, one marked in Russian, the other in Polish. The boy shrugs and invents his own names for them in Yiddish. You follow him, because the beauty of Yiddish was never about precision, it was about belonging, in a world that kept saying you didn't, and so, night after night, Yiddish kept whispering to those who needed it, not flawless, not official, but real. You close your eyes and hear the rhythm of the wheels again, like a lullaby that never needed translation. You're not in a shtetl this time, you're in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, circa 1953. The kind where the radiator always hisses, and you have to bang it with a spoon just to keep the heat from turning your soup into steam. The kitchen smells like dill, ink, and cigarette ash. There's a cracked window. A pot simmering. A transistor radio tuned halfway between Yiddish theater hour and some tinny English jazz, and on the table, a letter. Yellowed. Folded. Edges soft from too much unfolding. It's addressed to a grandson in Chicago. Written in phonetic Yiddish, Hebrew letters, but with Polish spelling and a German accent. You need 3 dialects and a memory to even begin decoding it, but that's the point. This isn't a letter, it's a relic, a map, a whisper from a world you didn't think survived. The grandmother who wrote it? She lived through pogroms, cholera, immigration, Ellis Island. She learned English from signs on subway cars and forgot how to write Hebrew cursive properly. But Yiddish? Yiddish she never had to relearn. It curled around her thoughts like steam from a teacup, and now you, the curious descendant, are leaning over that same table. Tracing those same letters. Realizing the language didn't vanish, it simply shifted. Yiddish wasn't made to last in marble or ink. It wasn't inscribed on monuments or declared by kings, it was meant to be spoken, and therefore remembered. Historians today still debate whether it's dying, reviving, or just hiding under the bed with your grandmother's kugel recipe. Linguists chart its mutations. Rabbis reinterpret its stories. Musicians remix it into jazz, but you're just listening, to a memory, to a rhythm, to the echo of syllables formed by women who couldn't write Hebrew, but could recite 5 generations of lullabies. By fishmongers who rhymed insults better than Shakespeare. By teenagers who scribbled revolutionary slogans in cursive Yiddish, then kissed them into bottles and flung them into the Vistula. Outside, a siren wails, inside, the radiator sighs, and you finally get the joke. Yiddish was never about survival, it was about refusal, to vanish, to conform, to translate, and that refusal became tradition. Tonight, maybe you'll learn a few words, tomorrow, maybe you'll forget them. But somewhere, a language just woke up, because you listened. So light a candle. Hum a tune. Say something ridiculous in a dialect only 3 people understand, the language will know what you mean, it always has. So now, the candle has burned low, the markets are quiet. The kitchen's empty. The wagons have rolled on, you've wandered through 1,000 years of whispered jokes, secret prayers, smuggled lullabies, and kitchen table revolutions, all in a tongue that was never supposed to be anything more than borrowed breath. But Yiddish made itself indispensable, it made itself home, not because of laws or lineage, but because of memory. Of rhythm. Of stories like the one you just lived tonight, you can still hear it. Can't you, that grandmother's voice? That mischievous poet's rhyme. That fish seller's curse turned into a lullaby, they're still there, waiting, so whenever the world grows too sharp, too loud, too forgetful, you can come back here, to this quiet tongue, this soft rebellion, this story, and sleep, knowing that nothing truly vanishes, not if it's spoken with heart, not if it's remembered. Good night, traveler, sleep warm, sleep Jewish.